Folks often ask me, why wouldn't an employee want to mediate? So if you're an employee in a conflict situation at work, and if someone, maybe your boss or a colleague or a friend or someone in HR has suggested mediation to you, and you're wondering, is mediation right for me? Then stick around. Similarly, if you've ever been in a situation where you've been trying to persuade an employee or a work colleague to mediate a dispute, and they've resisted or been confused as to whether to say yes, well, then this video is for you as well. In this video, I'm going to discuss 4 common reasons why employees might not choose to mediate and some key questions to ask. The first is a commonly overlooked reason: lack of information. They either don't know what mediation is, or they have an idea about it from something they heard about it, but they're confused and they're worried what they're getting into. From my own experience, I'd say this is perhaps the #1 reason why employees might balk or at least resist mediation. Of course, this makes sense. For most people who are not negotiation or mediation nerds like me, there are a whole bunch of dispute resolution processes that sound pretty similar to each other, but are often quite different. And so when they hear mediation and an employee gets this amorphous image of some process in their mind that frankly may or may not look like mediation at all. So let me be clear about what mediation is. Put simply, mediation is an entirely voluntary process where parties to a dispute work with a mediator to try to come to a resolution to their conflict. That person who is the mediator is charged with being neutral as to which party is right or wrong about any of the issues in dispute. The mediator's main job is to create a process to assist the parties in resolving their conflict. They do this by good listening, probing for underlying interests, and helping the parties transform possible resolutions to the conflict. So mediation is different from, let's say, arbitration. In arbitration, parties present their side of a dispute to an arbitrator or sometimes to a panel of 3 arbitrators, and then the arbitrators essentially render a decision that is binding. So in this sense, an arbitrator is like a privately paid judge. But in mediation, the mediator has no power to render any decision. Indeed, in mediation, all the parties are there voluntarily, and they can't be compelled to reach an agreement. So if there's no agreement at the end, the parties simply go back to where they were before the mediation happened. Now, sometimes an employee may know what mediation is, but may not be aware of its availability within a workplace. This is because mediation is generally a confidential process. So unlike many formal dispute resolution processes that often are on the public record, part of what makes mediation attractive to so many is that the entire process is confidential and therefore not publicized.
That's private.
But of course, that ends up contributing to the lack of awareness that many people have about what mediation is and what its benefits might be. The lack of knowledge about mediation contributes to a second major reason why employees often resist mediation, which is simply lack of trust about the process. By the time, let's say, an HR department or an employer or a boss suggests mediation, there's probably already been some kind of relational damage, a diminution in trust. So when mediation, a process about which the employee already knows very little, is proposed by the HR department or someone in the organization, it's unsurprising that there might be some hesitancy.
Well, I'm just not sure about that right now.
But there are also other reasons for lack of trust. One of the biggest reasons is that there can be fear of retaliation by a boss or a supervisor or the opposing party in the mediation. Some years ago, I received a phone call from someone on the board of a mid-sized company asking me to consider mediating a dispute that had risen between a senior manager and his team. After I did an initial call, I learned from the board member that literally no employee actually wanted to go on the record with their complaint about the bullying behavior and the temper tantrums that were, frankly, terrorizing the staff. The board member then said to me,
"We'd love for you to mediate."
And I responded,
"In order to mediate, there must be at least 2 sides to this conflict who are prepared to show up."
"Oh," said the board member, "well, none of the employees want to come forward because they are all afraid the boss will retaliate." And I thought to myself, okay, there are ways of addressing this very valid concern for sure, but if no employees want to mediate, we really can't have a mediation. So in order for mediation to work as a process where an employer and an employee are involved, there need to be some protections in place to avoid retaliation, to make sure it doesn't happen. Related to concerns of retaliation is a bigger fear that often exists among employees. You see, even though mediation as a dispute resolution process first began in the United States as part of community and individual empowerment movements of the 1960s and 70s, over time some companies started to use mediation as a way to blunt the power of organized labor. As I suspect viewers of these videos know, I am a huge fan of mediation. But I am only a fan of it when it's used appropriately and part of a wise and integrated conflict management system. Indeed, my textbook on designing systems and processes for managing disputes talks about the importance of mediation as one process and an intentional and well-designed set of processes for managing conflict. Without such an integrated system, mediation can be used as a way to quiet individual employees and blunt the ability of these employees to come together, to organize, and address systemic and power differences within the organization. It is hard to deny that mediation has been misused by some organizations as a way to prevent employees from unionizing and getting the full benefit of the power they could have had as a collective.
Pumpkins out. Let's go, gang.
The thinking was, better to pay off individual aggrieved persons than have a mass movement of unionized workers advancing rights for all. Indeed, when President George W. Bush formed the Transportation Security Administration, or TSA, after 9/11 to take over airport security, it was decided that new employees would not be allowed to unionize. Instead, they would be given an integrated dispute resolution system to handle worker complaints. On the one hand, as the author of one of only 2 dispute resolution systems textbooks in the United States, I should be gladdened by this development, and certainly I am in favor of organizations having dispute resolution systems. At the same time, when these systems are designed to actually prevent people from exercising rights, it can actually undermine the legitimacy of the process. All this is to say that in some circles, mediation just has gotten a bad reputation. And so add to that the final dynamic, which is the power of stories. Mediation is hard, and mediation in many places is not regulated, meaning that really anyone can declare themselves a mediator whether or not they are knowledgeable, experienced, skillful, or frankly understand the basic tenets of the process. The consequence is that there is no shortage of nightmare mediation stories out there that contribute to the general lack of trust in the process. I have heard all sorts of horror stories through the years, even in organizations that are otherwise seemingly well run and professional. Imagine, for example, forcing an employee into a mediation. This itself violates a basic mediation principle, which is the right of self-determination. In another situation, the person selected to be the mediator between the supervisor and the employees had no training in mediation and, believe this or not, was a personal friend of the supervisor.
Oh, no, you didn't.
In yet another situation, the mediator would discuss her strategy for getting the employee on board with the supervisor and then get his approval before proceeding.
What the hell?
Examples such as these contribute, very understandably, to the idea that mediation is a process not to be trusted. So as a fan of mediation, all I can tell you is that these mediation stories are really just examples of mediation gone awry. Because mediations conducted with professionalism by a skilled and trained practitioner, they don't always yield an agreement, but they do not promote abuses of power. They do not violate neutrality. They do not result in bullying of employees and asking them to forego their rights. Later, I'm going to provide some questions to ask before either deciding to agree to a mediation or to decide to walk away from it because of a lack of trust. A third reason why employees resist mediation is that they just don't believe it'll make a difference. They don't believe things will change. Their fear in situations like this relates to their sense of power difference, their lack of faith that anything can get them out of this bad situation. Now, of course, mediation doesn't offer guarantees, but part of the beauty of mediation is that either side still has full autonomy to decide whether and what to agree to.
Strongly agree.
It's understandable that an employee who is frustrated or fearful or exhausted in a bad situation may have little hope for a better future. At the same time, short of exit from the bad situation through resignation or a lawsuit, mediation actually offers a possible way forward. And yes, it's also true that mediation in the most dismal of circumstances is really an act of hope. In my mind, mediation with willing parties who are interested in being creative and problem solving can produce outcomes that are mutually advantageous and that, frankly, really change the work dynamic. But that involves implementation and monitoring in most cases. It involves a willingness of the parties to hope and believe that something is possible from the mediation. They don't need to commit to a favorable outcome, but they need to enter it with good faith. Of course, the last reason why employees may refuse to participate in mediation is they believe they can get a better result through another process. In mediation and negotiation, there is this concept called a BATNA. That is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And in assessing whether to pursue mediation, employees, or anyone really, should consider what they might get as a result of the mediation and what they can get if they pursue another course of action. That away from the table outcome is called one's BATNA. And as a measure of success, you don't want to agree to anything unless it's better than your BATNA. My advice in these situations is to consider carefully what might be available through mediation and what you will do if you do not mediate. In light of these many reasons why employees might not like to mediate, here are 3 things an employee can do before deciding to participate in a mediation. First, learn as much as you can in general about mediation. You can do this by watching some of my videos, but you can also read about different kinds of mediation processes and approaches. Don't just let your lack of knowledge about the process guide you with a yes or a no. Second, ask questions about the mediator and the mediation process. Who will the mediator be? Are they an external person or someone internal to the organization? If they are internal, what independence do they have and what training do they have to be a fair and neutral mediator? With respect to the mediation process, make sure that the participation does not waive any other rights you may have and that there is no obligation or expectation that you should or will agree. Third, as I alluded to above, ask yourself, what is my BATNA? In other words, if I don't mediate, what are the things that I might do without an agreement with the other side, and how will they meet my interests? The truth is, mediation has the possibility of offering many advantages to those who participate. The parties can craft outcomes that are creative and to mutual advantage, and it can help restore relationships. The likelihood that parties follow through and implement is also higher in mediation than through other processes. As a mediator, you won't be surprised to know I'm a fan. Having said that, employee objections to mediation are not totally unfounded. By learning more about mediation, by asking the right questions, employees can make really wise decisions about whether, when, and how to participate. And for more on that, check out Bob Bordone Teaches You How to Start a Difficult Conversation at Work, Part 1. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. To learn more about mediation, negotiation, and other dispute resolution processes, keep watching these videos. You can also learn more about the services I offer at bobbordone.com. Thanks for hanging out with me. I am Bob Bordone, and let's keep negotiating together. Here comes that video.